Hello, History of Sexuality students. This is Professor Bowen here. I just wanted to create a short lecture video giving you some instructions and tips for the second part of your research project, in which you will be putting together a bibliography of secondary sources. So I want to talk a little bit about what exactly secondary sources are, how you can find good historical secondary sources related to your research topic and specifically the question that you're pursuing, and how you can assemble this list of sources to submit next week. So, first, the instructions for this assignment. What you have to do is locate 7 different secondary sources that speak directly to the research question that you wrote for me in your research proposals and that you submitted last week. So you need to find 7 of these sources. Once you've done that, you need to basically make a document that is a works cited page that will list all of your sources according to Chicago footnote style. And then once you have that, all you need to do is submit your bibliography. The due date for that is Sunday, September 20th by the end of the day. So the first thing I want to talk about here is what exactly is a secondary source, because this is perhaps a term that is new to you. When we talk about secondary sources, basically what we mean is things that were created, or written, or published in our own time. The basic distinction that historians make between secondary sources and primary sources is that secondary sources come from our time, and primary sources come from the time period that you're studying. More particularly, a secondary source is a piece of academic research that analyzes documents and other kinds of primary source materials from the time period that the author is studying. Different kinds of secondary sources include books, articles, or chapters from edited volumes. When you search for these, you want to make sure that the scholarship that you're finding is academic in nature, meaning that it is published by a university press or a trade press that publishes scholarly works. A thing to watch out for: you should try to make sure that the articles, books, book chapters that you find are all written by actual historians. One way to do that is to do some research on the individual authors you come across in your search for this various forms of content. You can look up their bibliographies, you can look through their CVs online. You want to make sure that these are people with actual expertise in history, some specific field of history. You don't want scholarship that is produced by doctors, medical scientists, natural scientists, or other kinds of academics, right? This is a history class. We want to find stuff produced by historians. Another thing to make note of in terms of finding good secondary scholarship, we want stuff that is peer-reviewed, that has been vetted by other experts in the author's field and okayed for publications, right? So only things that are peer-reviewed. No blog posts or newspaper articles or videos or documentaries or anything else that doesn't have footnotes, references, and hasn't been peer-reviewed. So, how do you find good secondary sources? Typically, when I'm doing research and looking for these kinds of pieces, I start, like a lot of people, with Google Scholar. Google Scholar is a really powerful search engine for locating scholarship in a wide variety of fields. And because it is so broad-based, you have to be a little bit careful, I think, when using Google Scholar, because it's got research from so many different disciplines. Everything that you can find in academia is probably going to be on Google Scholar in some way, shape, or form. So you want to make sure that you have kind of the right keywords and search terms when you begin looking through things on Google Scholar. Since this is a class called History of Sexuality, some of those keywords for you might be history and sexuality, and then specifically whatever your topic is. Right? So, for example, if I was doing some research on, let's say, the history of sexuality in the Ottoman Empire, maybe my search terms would be history, sexuality, Ottoman Empire. And if I entered that into Google Scholar, I'd see a page with a list of different sources. Some of them might be useful, some not. One of the ones that I came across in my search, this is actually an article we're reading from class. It's a piece by Dror Zevi called Hiding Sexuality, the Disappearance of Sexual Discourse in the Late Ottoman Middle East. So let's say I came across this source. I thought, that looks interesting. Maybe I'll include it in my Works Cited page. But I'm not exactly sure if it works for my research question or not. So how do I determine if it's a really good secondary source? Well, it just so happens that this particular source is available on the web. If you click on the link on the right side of the screen that says PDF, jstore.org, it'll take you right to that article. All you got to do is click on it, and the PDF will pop right open for you. To determine whether or not it's a good quality source, one that speaks to your research question, I would suggest reading through the abstract. The abstract is a nice, tight, focused paragraph that lets you know what the author's research question is, what their argument is, what kinds of sources they're using. And reading through that, you should have a fairly good idea of whether or not it actually works for your own project. You probably don't want to read through every single potential source for your bibliography because that's just going to take too much time. But you can go through the abstract and on the basis of that make a decision. Am I going to include it or should I move on? Now, it sometimes happens that you can't actually find the article within Google Scholar. But if you do want to get it, if you're interested in it, and would like to read the abstract, you can actually go over to our library website, and under the Services tab, there is a link here, as you can see on the screen, called Interlibrary Loan. And if you click on that link right there, it'll take you to a page on which there is a form that you can request the article to be scanned and delivered to you electronically as a PDF. It goes right to your email account. All you have to do is fill out the library form. It's got all of this citation information, so it'll ask you what's the author, what's the name of the article, when was it published, where was it published, and you put all that into the form, and usually within a few days, the article will just show up in your email inbox and you can read it and see if that abstract is actually going to work for you. You can do the same for book chapters, right? Let's say in your search, for example, I also came across a book written by the same author, Dror Zevi, called Producing Desire, Changing Sexual Discourse in the Ottoman Middle East, 1500 to 1900. And I said, oh, okay, well, it's by the same historian who I'm already going to use from one of my other sources. Maybe I should take a look at their book. So in Google Scholar, I clicked on the link and I scroll through a few of the first couple pages and I see the table of contents. And I look through the table of contents and I might see, oh, okay, maybe I would like to see the second chapter, Regulating Desire, Sharia and Qanun, because maybe I'm interested in Islamic religious discourses on sexuality. I don't know. I may be interested in that chapter. I can go back to the NU library website, fill in all of the citation info, and in a couple days, again, just like an article, the chapter in that book should show up in my inbox as a downloadable PDF, and I can think about whether I want to use this for my bibliography. So you can do ILL for articles and also for chapters in books. Usually with books, you can't get more than 2 chapters, so you do have to be a little bit picky with them, but nonetheless, that's totally an option. All right, so at this point, I've got 1, maybe 2 sources that I want to use for my bibliography, but I need 7 total. How do I get there? Well, one thing that might be useful for you at this point, there is a really nice feature in Google Scholar that is called Cited By. You can see it, I just circled it on the page there. This is everyone who has cited George Zevy's book, Producing Desire. You can see there are 264 people who have cited it in their own work since it was published in 2006. And if I click on that Cited By link, I am taken to a page that has lots of other sources. In fact, it is all of those 264 other books and articles that in some way made use of George Zevy's Producing Desire. Some of these sources are not going to be related to my topic at all, and you can just skim right through those, but others might actually be useful, and you can do the same thing that you did before. Click on the link, see if there's a downloadable PDF available. If not, go through the library website and fill out the ILL form. Hopefully you can read an abstract or learn enough about the book to say whether or not it's going to be useful for your bibliography. But the Cited By feature is a really powerful one, and I think you'll find it useful in terms of looking for sources for your research. Another thing that you might want to do is browse through some of the top journals in the field. And I've just listed a few of them on this slide right here. Probably the best known, the most authoritative, if there is a flagship journal in the field, it would probably be the Journal of the History of Sexuality. But that's not the only one that's important, and that might have good quality academic publications for you on your topic. You could also try the Journal of Homosexuality, Sexualities, and GLQ, the Journal of Lesbian and Gay Studies. These other 3 journals are also top tier. They have a high impact factor. They're all peer-reviewed and have lots of good information. They're not exclusively historical, though. So when you're looking at Journal of Homosexuality, Sexualities, and GLQ, you do have to be careful because some of them only deal with contemporary issues and don't have any historical content at all. But that's potentially a good place for you to go to look for sources. Another thing that I should mention here is that there is a website called HistSex.org, which I would strongly encourage you to look at. It is a one-stop repository for all kinds of fascinating resources around the history of sexuality. I can't go into all of the amazing things that they have on this website, but it is like a warehouse of materials. They have digital projects, research collections. They're actually working on putting together a collection of syllabuses in history of sexuality. So this is also a good place to go if you get stuck and need help finding sources. Lastly, one thing that might really help and that a lot of people perhaps don't think of is you can actually search for syllabuses on the internet through Google or whatever your preferred web search engine is. In this example, going with the topic I chose earlier, I just typed in history of sexuality in quotes and then Islam and then syllabus, and a long list of sites popped open. I found the third one to be pretty interesting because I'm interested for this topic in the history of the Middle East and sexuality there. And I found a syllabus that was just available for me to look at online called Islam and Sexuality by Dr. Fawn Shirazi. And scrolling through that syllabus, I found in the 7th week of the class a really interesting reading that I didn't know anything about before. And perhaps going back to Google Scholar, I could type in the title and then get it and think about whether it's useful for my research. So all of these are strategies that you can use to gather secondary sources. I hope they prove really helpful. I'm looking forward to seeing what you produce next week.